Hi, good morning. So we'll be taking the last class of TB spine today, uh, and I think in the subsequent classes I'll be talking about spondylolisthesis, IVDP, and so on. So coming to the complications where we stopped last time. Last slide was on the complications. So it can result in paraplegia, cold abscess, spinal deformity, sinuses, secondary infection, amyloidosis, and finally death. Now coming to POTS paraplegia, so obviously thoracic spinal cord is, or the lower thoracic spine or the thoracolumbar spine is the most commonest location for TB spine, like we had discussed it in the first class. And obviously all of us know that the spinal cord ends at lower border of L1, and in a newborn the spinal cord is usually at the level of L3. Now what happens is there is a differential growth rate difference between the spinal column and the spinal cord. So the spinal column grows faster than the spinal cord, and hence the spinal cord as the child grows ends at L1. It was at birth, however the spinal cord ends at L3. So as the child grows, the spinal cord grows slowly, whereas the spinal column, that is the structures, the bony structures which support the spine, grows faster. Hence, the spinal cord ends at lower border of L1 in an adult. Now, the incidence of POTS paraplegia is roughly around 10 to 30%, and dorsal spine, like we had discussed, is most commonest location. And motor function is affected before or greater than sensory. Now, why? Because this TB spine is predominantly a disease of the anterior and the middle spinal column. That means the disease is most commonly affecting the vertebral body. So the spinal cord, the vertebral body lies anterior to the spinal cord. So what happens is any pus, abscess, granulation tissue which builds up here, goes posteriorly and compresses the spinal cord. So what do we have in the anterior part of the spinal cord? So obviously the motor column, the motor tracts. The motor tracts are the one which are in the anterior part of the spinal cord, and the dorsal part or the posterior part of the spinal cord is usually predominantly sensory. So what happens is, hence when the pus or the abscess or the granulation tissue compresses the spinal cord from anterior to posterior, motor function gets affected before and to a greater extent than the sensory system. So in a TB spine which is going on to become a POTS paraplegia, when a patient walks in, never just check sensory level or sensory examination and say that the patient is doing okay because his sensory system is intact. So in a TB spine particularly, always examine for the motor system. So when the motor system is affected, so obviously patient wouldn't be able to walk. Yes, but that's not in the early stage of the disease. In the early stage of disease, when there is mild compression of the cord, there is some amount of spasticity secondary to compression of the spinal cord resulting in myelopathy, but the patient would still be able to walk. So I'll be coming to that later on. But there is early stage is when a patient, that's called as the Kumar's clinical stage of grading. So early stage of paraplegia is when the patient is able to walk, but the physician detects the extensor plantar response or Babinski's, that is grade 1. Okay, so I'll be talking about that in the next slide. So sense of position and vibration is last to disappear. Why? Because obviously they are the posterior column lesion, posterior column. They are located in the posterior column in the spinal cord. So sequential events of paralysis are, so patient will have some amount of muscle weakness, then they'll have an awkward gait, there will be some amount of incoordination or imbalance, and then spasticity, and finally resulting in paraplegia and extension, and then paraplegia and flexion. Now why is this paraplegia and flexion written last? Because paraplegia and flexion is the last stage of POTS paraplegia, when there is severe compression of the corticospinal tract or the pyramidal tracts, resulting in severe spasms or otherwise known as the flexor spasms, following which there is an irreversible damage to the cord, and then it is a, it will obviously most of the times it will end in a irreversible damage to the cord and could be fatal. Now What are the causes for paraplegia? So causes are based on Seddon's classification. So early onset is basically because of inflammatory causes like abscess, inflammatory tissue or a caseating mass. There is something called a spinal tumor syndrome, that is when it is predominantly a disease which is full of granulation tissue and caseous tissue without much damage to the vertebral body, resulting in, like when you get an X-ray done, you might not see much of damage, but there is severe pus and granulation tissue and caseous necrosis which is causing the compression of the spinal cord, resulting in paraplegia. So that's called as a spinal tumor syndrome. So only an MRI will be the diagnostic modality of choice in these cases. Posterior spinal disease, obviously, as I told you, if the disease involves, normally it's TB is a disease of the anterior and the middle spinal column, but if it involves the laminae or any of the posterior elements, it's called as a posterior spinal disease. And then most important is a sudden onset paraplegia resulting from vascular involvement. So it could be because of a infective thrombosis of the cord, or else it could be vasculitis of the spinal cord, or else sometimes venous infarction. So all of those carry a poor prognosis. Now mechanical is basically when you have a pathological dislocation, compression by sequestra, loose fragments of bone or disc, and pressure granulation tissue and debris. Late onset, obviously late onset is when you have a late reactivation of the disease, or else whenever there is a kyphotic deformity over which the spinal cord stretches and finally resulting to a mechanical stretching of the cord and resulting in its blood circulation. Now coming to the management, obviously management is based on that. No, coming to the, I think I missed that slide, Kumar's clinical grading. So obviously when a patient, the initial stage is stage 1, when the patient walks in but he is unaware of the deficits, but the physician detects a extensor plantar or a Babinski's response. That is stage 1. Stage 2 is patient has realized there is weakness, but he is able to walk with the help of a support. So that is stage 2. Now stage 3 is when you have weakness which is involving less than 50% of your muscles, and then the grade is above 3. So, and no sensory involvement or sphincter disturbances. Now grade 4 is whatever is not there in grade 3, that is the worst phase. That is when there is more than 50% of paralysis and there is severe flexor spasms or bowel and bladder involvement or severe sensory disturbances. So this is the Kumar staging for the classification, clinical classification of the tuberculosis. Now management, obviously medical and surgical, and I'm pretty sure medical, all of you guys are very well versed. So medical drugs, I don't have to tell you, you will all be aware about all this isoniazid, rifampicin, pyrazinamide, and the ethambutol, streptomycin and all those things. And obviously if a patient is getting admitted, you would give a streptomycin, and when the patient is getting discharged, you would obviously put him on an ethambutol and get him discharged. So the intensive phase which we follow is for 2 months, which consists of 4 drugs: INH, rifampicin, pyrazinamide and ethambutol. And then the continuation phase, which is usually in the case of spine we follow for 7 months, so which is usually consisting of INH and rifampicin. So the side effects of pyrazinamide, I'm pretty sure you know, gout and hepatotoxicity and all those things, so get a blood test done. INH, obviously it's resulting in peripheral neuritis. Obviously we're going to put him on B6 tablets and from the day he's been diagnosed with tuberculosis, and we start him on ATT. And then rifampicin, I'm pretty sure rifampicin is one drug which will also help you to tell whether the patient is taking medications or not, because obviously his secretions turn orange to red. So obviously if a patient has been taking secretions, the social worker just has to go and examine his inner garments, and if they have turned orange and red, so it's an indirect evidence that the patient has been taking the tablets. And if not, obviously, if the patient is not been taking tablets, it's very obvious. So then explain the prognosis that he becomes a defaulter, and then the chances of him going in for an MDR or an XDR is very high. MDR or an XDR. So now that is regarding rifampicin. But rifampicin is also the one which usually causes, intolerance to taking it, because patient have that intolerance to this drug, especially because of its reactions. I'm pretty sure you would have heard of all the side effects of rifampicin. And then coming to pyrazinamide or ethambutol, I'm pretty sure you know what should be done in ophthalmic evaluation, streptomycin and ENT, auditory examination, because it can cause some deafness. Coming to middle path regime. What is middle path regime? Middle path regime is basically in a country like India, where we had so much of load of tuberculosis, then we couldn't sit and operate on all those patients. So this was the path regime followed by TULI. So basically, all the patients who are not critically ill or not having any kind of stridor or neurological paralysis or neurological involvement, or who are not in that toxic stage, need to undergo, who don't need surgical intervention, first are tried with, the middle path, where patients are being followed. And if they deteriorate, then you take him up for surgery. So basically, middle path regime consists of rest in heartbeat, chemotherapy, X-ray and EHR once in 3 months, and then MRI is usually done at the end of the treatment if the patient doesn't worsen during the course of the treatment. If he worsens, obviously he would be needing a surgery, or would be if there is a cord compromise or cord compression, or if there is any compression on the bowel, secondary to the cauda equina, then obviously he would need a decompression or a surgery. So obviously MRI is done at the usually at the end of the treatment, that is at end of 9 months, and gradual mobilization is encouraged if the patient doesn't have any neural deficits with spinal braces. And obviously streptomycin with INH solution I have already discussed, and watch for signs of improvement. Now drugs, I have already told you INH, intensive phase we use INH, and if needed you can okay, this is not the spine regimen, this is a pulmonology probably, and that's why, yes, this is what. So we don't use this. What we do in the spine is basically INH, rifampicin, pyrazinamide, ethambutol for in the intensive phase, which is for 2 months, and continuation phase we use only INH and rifampicin. Obviously, vitamin B6 is supplemented in both the phases. Now coming to the surgical indication. Now surgical indications, obviously you will have to consider absolute indication, where a patient develops paraplegia when the patient is on adequate medical line of treatment, paraplegia showing no signs of improvement, progressive paraplegia, complete paraplegia, severe spastic paraplegia, paraplegia which is of rapid onset, and long-standing paraplegia in 6 months. Now relative indications are recurrent paraplegia, debilitated old age, and if a patient has complications like UTI stones and painful paraplegia. Rare indications are posterior spinal disease, spinal tumor syndrome, severe cauda equina paralysis. Obviously, coming to the surgical procedures, most commonest, most easiest way is drainage of abscess, which is done for ones which are very superficial, like if it's in the posterior if it's in the very superficial dorsal aspect of the back, you just put a nick on the abscess and then you drain it. And in the spine, obviously, earlier what we used to do is costotransversectomy. So costotransversectomy, as the name suggests, costo means costal, rib, transversectomy, transverse process. So basically, a rib articulates with the vertebral body or with the spine in 2 levels. 1 at the transverse process, 2 at the level of the vertebral body. So there is a costovertebral joint and a costotransverse joint. Costovertebral joint is more ventral, whereas costotransverse is more dorsal. So this costotransversectomy is basically you position the patient prone and you approach the patient from behind, and then you put an incision in the midline and then go little laterally to reach up to the level of the costotransverse joint. Now once you do this, once you reach the costotransverse joint, do the excision of the part of the costal process and a transversectomy. Now once that's done, whatever pus, granulation tissue and anything which is anterior to this anterior part of the vertebral column would be drained. So this is basically an indirect procedure for draining the cord. Basically the cord is not addressed here. Here basically when you have a large pus, abscess, granulation tissue which is in the anterolateral aspect of the vertebral body, not the anterolateral aspect of the spine. The next procedure what we do is the anterolateral decompression. Here you need to understand this point is anterolateral decompression. When you say anterolateral, it is the anterolateral part of the spinal cord which is being decompressed here. So anterolateral decompression means the anterolateral part of the spinal column, that is the spinal canal. So obviously here you will enter the spinal cord. So obviously you will, what you will do is you will remove a part of the pedicle, you will remove the transverse process, you will remove the lamina, you will remove the part of the pedicle and then reach anteriorly into the vertebral body and then decompress that part. And obviously by doing this you are decompressing the anterolateral part of the spinal cord. So this is obviously a direct decompression of the spinal cord, and this is what we usually do because as all of us know, the tuberculosis is predominantly a disease of the anterior part of the spinal cord. Okay, so that is obviously, hence this is giving you a better result than the indirect decompression. Now obviously if the patient, if you are unable to position the patient prone, and then if he is debilitated, then you would obviously do it in a patient with a supine or a left lateral, and then you go anterior to the, you go from the ventral aspect from the abdomen onto that, and then when you anteriorly decompress, and then you will have to consider fusion also. Laminectomy is only done, as I told you, laminectomy is only done when tuberculosis involves the posterior elements, that is the lamina. So the disease is not involving the anterior and the middle column and only involving the posterior elements. So obviously it is better to go ahead and remove that posterior elements. Otherwise, in tuberculosis, which is usually a disease of the anterior and the middle column, by doing laminectomy you are destabilizing the spine, because in TB of the spine usually the posterior elements are spared. Like in Thule, only 2% of the cases had posterior spinal disease. Hence you should be very careful when you do a laminectomy in tuberculosis of the spine, because that can be devastating if you do not follow the indications. Now prognosis, like all of us know that younger the age, better is the prognosis, and vice versa. Because of the response of the treatment. Younger means, this doesn't mean that we are talking about the pediatric age group. Obviously pediatric age group, younger means the younger the adult. Pediatric age group would obviously have a bad prognosis because the deformity becomes permanent. General condition is obviously is better the general condition, better is the prognosis. Shorter the duration, better is the prognosis. If you have in terms of severity of the disease, incomplete paralysis without bladder and bowel involvement, obviously the sensory loss is better. And sensory loss, if you have a bowel bladder involvement, then the sensory loss, then it's a poor prognosis. Type, obviously early onset it's better. Speed of onset, slow onset has better prognosis. If there is a rapid onset of paraplegia, it's a poor prognosis because obviously a vascular insult or a venous infarction has happened. Kyphotic deformity more than 60 degrees, poor is the prognosis. So this comes to the last slide, that is for our TB spine, and in the next subsequent classes I'll be taking about listhesis and IVDP and so on. Okay, if you have any doubts you can obviously mail me or you can WhatsApp me. Thank you.
Hi. 10 minutes late.